This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. I am Cesar Delgado. We are getting ready for this planting season and taking any action against the pathogens in the crop and the field. He is joining me now is Horacio Lopez Nicora from the Ohio State University. Horacio is a pathologist at the Ohio State. This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. Getting ready for the planting season and taking any action against the pathogens in the crop and the field. He is joining me now is Horacio Lopez Nicora from the Ohio State University. Horacio is a pathologist at the Ohio State. Hi, Horacio. How are you?
Hello, Cesar. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here again. Very happy to be with you.
Horacio, let's discuss about these challenges and the diseases in the beans. What do you recommend for herbicides to tackle these diseases?
So that's a good question. So the question is, with some of these soil-borne pathogens that once we have it in our field, we cannot get rid of them. Some example of these pathogens are soybean cyst nematodes, the fungus that causes sudden death syndrome, SDS. It's another one. The fungus that causes red crown rot, it's another soil-borne pathogen. The water moles, Phytophthora pythiums, those are also soil-borne pathogens. So these are examples of pathogens that they infest your fields. Once they get introduced to your field, there's nothing we can do to completely eradicate them. So that's when we need to think about management strategies to keep population levels low, inoculum levels low, so they cause less and less significant yield reduction. So in many cases, what we recommend is an integrated approach. And this is for all of them, right? Just of course, things will differ when we start talking about each one, but identifying a soybean cultivar with resistance to that particular pathogen, that's key. Complement and consider a seed protectant that is also useful. So a fungicide that can further protect the root health from that pathogen and others that are in the soil. Some of the cultural practices that we will be able to use to change the environmental conditions to avoid disease happening. So we know that for a disease to happen, we need three key components, and we call this the disease triangle. We need a susceptible host, the soybean in this case, a virulent pathogen, the pathogen that you have in your field, and the conducive environmental conditions. If we don't have one of these three components, there's not going to be disease. So we may have the pathogen in the field, we may have a host in the field, but if the conditions are not favorable, disease will not happen. And sometimes we use these in our advantage. For example, the water moles, Phytophthora and Pythium, require sitting water. So those fields that are poorly drained will suffer more from Pythium and Phytophthora. So a cultural practice is drain those fields, make sure that those fields are well drained. We can do this in many ways. Tiling will be one of them, but make sure that we don't have that sitting water there that creates that environmental condition for these pathogens to cause disease, right? There are other pathogens that unfortunately, very little we can do by modifying our environment. So then we rely on, again, cultivar soybean resistance and seed protectants such as some fungicides or nematicides, right, in the case of nematodes. But at the end of the day, everything comes to confirm you have the problem. Sometimes we even forget about that. Sometimes we even forget about testing our soils to know if we have soybean cyst nematode. Sometimes, we miss by correctly diagnosing what is causing the symptomology we're seeing in the field. So we may see plants that look like they have SDS, sudden death syndrome, but there are other pathogens that cause the same symptoms. So that foliar chlorosis, so yellowing of the leaves with the veins remaining green, we call this intervenial chlorosis and necrosis, very characteristic of SDS. We're very well trained to see and identify that. Unfortunately, many other diseases can cause the same symptoms. That's a risk, of us misdiagnosing a problem, especially if the problem is an emerging pathogen in the region. And the clear example is red crown rot, right? It causes very much the same symptomology as SDS, but it's caused by a different pathogen. It can also cause symptomology that resembles those caused by Phytophthora or Macrophomina, charcoal rot. So it's very important to first confirm, very, very accurately diagnose what we're dealing with, to then later take all these different management strategies that we were talking about.
What is your prediction on this planting season for the pathogens? Could you tell our audience about these pathogens, like nematode in the beans?
Yeah, so, it's always hard when someone asks you what's your prediction on what may happen this season, right? But with this soil-borne pathogen, and if you know you have it, if you previously experienced yield reduction due to these problems, it's pretty certain that you will have to deal with it again this year. So you mentioned soybean cyst nematode, right? It's the number one pathogen of soybean in North America. It's arguably the most economically damaging pathogen in soybean in United States and Canada. So proactively, we need to know if we have it, and we do that by collecting a soil sample, sending a soil sample to a lab that can process that, tell us how much soybean cyst nematode we have, and most of the labs will report that in numbers of eggs per 100 cc of soil. Cc stands for cubic centimeters. So very important to know if we have it, but most important is to know how much we have it, because those levels will dictate the strategies that we will apply. So keeping low levels of SCN is the best way to deal with this problem. But again, we need to proactively go and sample fields, even if they look healthy. This is one of the big issues with soybeans is nematode, that it can cause significant yield reduction with absolutely no above ground symptoms. So you may have a beautiful, healthy looking soybean field, yet that field can be losing a lot of yield due to soybean cyst nematode. And as the season progress, the nematode will continue to reproduce and those numbers will go up. And once we get to very high levels of SCN, it's really hard to bring it down again to below damage threshold. So even if you think you don't have SCN, but you never tested your field, that will be the first line of action here. Like, test your field this season to know if you have and how much SCN you have. Hopefully you don't have it, so that can be non-detected. But if you do have, how much you have it. If you have been dealing with SCN for a while, then a sample submitted to a lab will help you monitor those levels. How am I doing? the resistant cultivar I use, the seed protectant I use, is it helping bring those levels down? With SEN, we also have crop rotation that helps. So planting corn following soybeans does a really good job of reducing soybeans in nematode in that season, because the soybeans in nematode cannot reproduce on corn. So these are integrated management approach that we recommend for dealing with SCN specifically.
Yes, it is pretty hard to make a prediction on the diseases.
Yeah,
I
so
was in San Antonio.
sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I was in San Antonio for Commodity Classic. Does farmers feel worried about red root rot in the field again for this year?
Yeah, so I think 2 weeks ago,
What is your thoughts with 4,2-D for other pathogens?
again, we're coming out, at least in Ohio, we had a lot of snow, so we had a winter that felt like a winter. And just coming out of that, a wet spring with a lot of sitting water may be conducive for some of the seedling issues. So keep an eye on that when we're seeing plants coming out. Collecting soil samples and identifying if we may be dealing with seedling um, diseases. That will be, one of the first things. If these have happened in the past, make sure that we have a package with seed treatment that can target multiple soil-borne pathogens that can affect our seedlings and our establishment of soybeans, so the emergence and then the stand counts, right? Again, if we're dealing with these soil-borne pathogens, just be aware that they will not go away. So always helpful to consider a resistance and then a seed protectant. And then eventually walk the fields, right? I always say scout your fields, walk your fields. If you start seeing that there are symptoms developing, and it's a foliar pathogen, then just make sure that you're dealing with that situation and consider a fungicide application. Most of the time, when we get to R3, we just go and spray fungicide. We have data from multiple years, multiple sites with very low disease pressure, very low foliar disease pressure. And I'm talking about Septoria brown spot, I'm talking about frog eye leaf spot, I'm talking about Septoria cercospora leaf blight. And, applying just a fungicide when we don't have the problem, it's throwing money away. So strongly recommend to walk the fields when we're getting close to that R2, R3, and see if we're seeing any symptoms, presence of the disease that will warrant any fungicide application. I mean, fungicides are a great tool, but just applying fungicide when we don't have the disease pressure doesn't pay. And then YML is another one that we normally have in some regions here in Ohio, and that really is depending on environmental conditions, right? And for that one, there is, information on seed catalogs about partial resistance, and there is, good fungicides that can be applied. However, the application must happen at the R1, R2 growth stage. So we want to protect the flowers of the soybean if we are dealing with YML in a region. Yeah.
How come we see these diseases, Horacio?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Did you see? Can you please repeat the question?
How come we see these diseases, Horacio?
How can we see them? How can we see them? Well, most of these foliar pathogens will express themselves by causing symptoms. So a symptom is what we call a manifestation of the disease, right? So we can see spots in a leaf, very characteristic spots. The leaf may start turning yellow. The plant may start dying prematurely. So we can see things when we walk our fields. But we need to walk our fields. We need to go there, get out of the truck, and walk our fields. We need to scout our fields. We need to look for insect damage. We need to look for the potential presence of disease. And how do we see it? Well, we see it if we start looking at the leaf and we start seeing spots and we start seeing, you know, indications that the plant is not healthy looking. We talk about with soybeans is nematode, we don't see, in many cases, we don't see symptoms. So pretty much we rely on collecting a soil sample and testing for SEN. So that's the way that we will go about that. With these other soil-borne pathogens, we may see, like we said, like we just mentioned, reduction in stand. So we will see less plant coming out or dying soon after they emerge. And we will start suspecting of seedling disorder or seedling diseases. We may see later on these intervenial chlorosis or plants drying out all of a sudden, prematurely dying. We may suspect we have SDS, brown stem rot, or red crown rot in that case, right? But again, it's all very dependent on what weather we're gonna get this season, right? So again, we need to be walking those fields. We need to visit our fields, routinely and check for how our plants are doing at different growth stage. August, September, August, that's the time when most of these diseases will start showing up. That's a great time for sure to walk those fields. But again, we go out there and see how plants are doing after planting. Are they coming out? How well is our soybean, establishing in our field? And those will give us indication that we may be dealing with seedling disorders, seedling diseases later on, foliar pathogens, and so on.
What is your final thoughts about this? Thanks, Horacio. I am glad. What is your final thoughts about this growing season for the pathogens?
Yeah, so the one that we can take action right away is collect a soil sample for SEN. So if it's the most important pathogen of soybean, we need to know if we have it, and we need to know how much we have it if our field is infested with SEN. There are many labs that provide some processing samples free of charge for growers. So there are many universities, many land-grant universities across the US that will process soil sample for SEN with no charge for the grower. And this is all thanks to Chekhov support. So take advantage of that. And the SEN Coalition is a great resource to go and learn more about soybean cyst nematode and how to manage soybean cyst nematode. So the SCNcoalition.com will take you to a website that has a lot of information and a list of the different states with multiple labs that can process soil sample for SEN testing is also available in the SCN Coalition website. So the SCNcoalition.com, multiple resources for learning more and about SEN and also management of SEN. So that would be my first recommendation there. Before planting, if you're waiting to plant, go and collect a soil sample and send it to an hematology lab. And then once we plant, once the season starts, walk those fields, visit those fields, and scout those fields at the different growth stages. Every growth stages will have its challenge, so keep an eye open for these diseases.
Thanks, Horacio. I am glad to have you on again.
Yes, thank you, Cesar. Thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
This is Horacio Lopez Nicora from the Ohio State University On Back Roads of Illinois podcast.
Thank you. Goodbye.